Authorities release footage of guards leaving a cell ablaze in a detention center in Mexico.
At least 39 people died after inmates set fire to their mattresses. More details on this later in the news. Good evening, I am Ricky Mathay.
And I am Nina Richielago Flores. This is Mata ng Agila International. Now for the headlines.
Dozens killed after Philippine passenger vessel catches fire. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. eyes boosting local medicine production. U.S. warns China not to use Taiwan president's visit as a pretext for aggression. Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky says he is ready to meet with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. And President Vladimir Putin concedes international sanctions have hurt Russian economy.
Another sea tragedy happened Wednesday night after a passenger vessel caught fire, killing 31 people on board. Rescue and retrieval operations are underway as dozens of other passengers are still missing. Paulo Ramos for the story.
31 people have died after passenger vessel MV Mary Joy 3 caught fire in the waters of Basilan. The search and retrieval operation for the 80 missing passengers from the burned ship is still ongoing. Only 230 passengers were listed on the manifest before the ship departed from Zamboanga City on Wednesday night. However, authorities suspect that the ship may have been overloaded considering the number of fatalities, rescued, and missing passengers. More than 20 victims are at the port in Zamboanga City, while others are at the port in Isabela City, Basilan. According to Richard Falcatan, spokesman for the Basilan provincial government, the Basilan LGU will cover the expenses for transporting the bodies to Jolo on Thursday night. Meanwhile, the hospitalized survivors will be assisted until they recover from the tragedy at sea. Apart from the bodies in the funeral home in Zamboanga City, 20 survivors are being treated in separate hospitals in the city. The families of the missing passengers continue to hope that their relatives will be found. Paulo Ramos for Mata ng Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.
The U.S. Naval Forces Central Command has announced that it will transfer two Cyclone-class patrol ships to the Philippine Navy. Authorities say the USS Monsoon and USS Chinook, which were designed for shallow water operations, will be handed over to the Philippines soon. The two vessels were officially decommissioned in Bahrain on Tuesday after 28 years of coastal patrol service. The U.S. Navy says the handover is to further boost the Philippines' capabilities in guarding and patrolling territorial waters. U.S. officials add the Philippines, along with Bahrain and Egypt, are members of the largest multinational naval partnership in the world called Combined Maritime Forces. The Philippines reportedly often met with China and other East Asian countries over maritime disputes. Recently, the PCG said the BRP Malapascua was overshadowed by a Chinese Coast Guard.
Japan has conveyed its support to the Philippines on the maritime issues in the West Philippine Sea. Adi Bulodato tells us more.
The Department of Foreign Affairs, or DFA, announced yesterday that the Japanese government has expressed its support for the Philippine instances on maritime issues. This was discussed during the 5th Maritime Dialogue between the two countries in Tokyo, Japan. This was mentioned along with the key components of the two countries' active engagement in the field of maritime cooperation. The DFA said that the two countries exchanged views on issues of mutual interest, including the situation in vital waterways of the West Philippine Sea, Luzon Strait, Sulu Celeb Seas, and the East China Sea, regional efforts to maintain peace and stability, and climate change. The both sides also agreed on the importance of the international provision of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Japan also reiterated its support for the 2016 South China Sea Arbitration Award, which found China claims, including the 9-dash line, reclamation, and other activities in Philippine waters illegal. The two countries further agreed to strengthen security and maritime cooperation to promote stability in the Indo-Pacific region during the bilateral summit in Japan last month. However, the Embassy of Japan clarified on Tuesday that no agreements have been reached regarding the consultation. Adi Buludato for Mata ng Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.
The Philippine government will boost local drug manufacturing, address the nursing shortages, and improve healthcare workers' pay. It is a precaution taken by the government in preparation for an emergency such as COVID-19. Randy Bernardino tells us more.
At a meeting with the Private Sector Advisory Council, or PSAC, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. emphasizes that the local production of essential medicine should be maximized. The president is committed to prevent a recurrence of medicine supply shortages experienced during the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic lockdowns. The Department of Health, or DOH, and Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, will join forces with private businesses. They will determine which medications can be produced in the Philippines. They want to maximize the utilization capacity of local pharmaceutical manufacturers, especially in the production of anti-tuberculosis drugs, which are essential for Filipino patients. Meanwhile, President Marcos also wants to rectify the lack of nurses and improve the wages of health workers. The president asks the Commission on Higher Education, or CHED, to tackle the insufficiency of nurses, which is exacerbated by nurses departing the nation. The migration of Filipino nurses has a significant impact on the country's ability to provide good health care services. The president believes that the government should be wise when it comes to healthcare manpower, especially since the country is competing with the rest of the world, as many countries that pay far more than the Philippines are constantly looking for Filipino nurses. Randy Bernardino for Mata ng Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.
Asolan is pushing for a proposed law that will give more power to the National Nutrition Council, or NNC, to combat hunger and malnutrition in the country. Agri Party List Representative Wilbert Lee filed House Bill 7586, or the Nutrition Act of 2023, which seeks to transform the National Nutrition Council into the National Nutrition Commission to expand its authority. Under the Nutrition Act of 2023, a 10-year Philippine Plan of Action for nutrition will be created to finally end the problem of hunger and malnutrition in accordance with the wishes of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. According to Lee, the lack of nutrients in food results in poor academic performance among youth, as well as issues of stunted growth among the new generation of Filipinos. Once the proposed Nutrition Act 2023 becomes a law, the National Nutrition Commission will be able to help local government units, the Department of Education, the Department of Health, and the Department of Social Welfare and Development implement the program against hunger and malnutrition under the Philippine Multi-Sectoral Nutrition Project, which will be funded by the World Bank.
The majority of senators await the committee report on the proposed amendments to the Constitution. But chances on a dialogue between members of both chambers of Congress are slim. Mian Corvera has the story.
The requested dialogue between the House of Representatives and the Senate regarding the manner of charter change is unlikely to happen, despite Senator Robin Padilla's letter appealing to fellow senators to support a meeting among congressmen to advance the charter change. Senate Majority Leader Joel Villanueva says he is unaware of the intention behind the letter. In the Senators' caucus, it was agreed that they would follow the process of creating laws, and this also applies to the two proposed amendments of economic provisions. Once the committee report is ready and has sufficient support from the members, it will automatically be brought up for deliberation in the plenary.
We are a collegial body. At the end of the day, we are governed by rules. At the end of the day, if we have a committee report signed by the required number of members, then we have no other choice but to deliberate the committee report in the plenary.
If the senators are convinced of the proposal and there is sufficient support, there is no reason for it not to be approved by the higher chamber. At present, Villanueva says they are waiting for the committee report on the two proposals regarding charter change led by Padilla. He is not sure whether his fellow senators will support it, but it is clear that lawmakers are more in favor of pushing proposals that serve the interest and provide protection for Filipinos.
Na-express naman ng mga miyembro yung kanilang concerns, maging ang concern ng aming chairman. And I thought it was pretty clear, no, that we will move as one, and as mentioned by everyone, ang number one talaga is protect the best interest of our people. Secondary, yung protection of our institution.
Senator Ronald Bato de la Rosa admits that getting enough support for the charter change in the Senate will be difficult as the senators have different views on the matter and are independent.
So I wish na yung kanyang intention ay mabigyan rin ng magandang pagtingin sa aming mga kasamahan dahil nga sa nakita namin ngayon, mukhang mahirapan kaming kumuha ng malaking suporta in terms of numbers. Pagdating nakapagsalita na ang yung liderato ng Senado na hindi priority yung charter change at wala tayong kung suporta rin galing sa Malacanang. So those words are like cold water dousing on our aspiration towards charter change.
Although he gave his commitment to support the charter change to Padilla, it should be limited to academic provisions, and the House of Representatives and Senate must separately vote on it.
Kung us and voting separately yung dalawang houses ng Congress. Kung lalabas yan, kung makalabas yan doon, din susuportahan natin. Kaya depende kung anong laman ng committee report. Kailangan basahin muna natin.
Mayan Corvera for Mata ng Agila International, trusted, connected, on point.
House Speaker Martin Romualdez will act as caretaker of the 3rd Congressional District of Negros Oriental from March 23 until May 23 of this year. This is based on Memorandum Order 19017 signed by Speaker Romualdez due to the 60-day suspension order of the House of Representatives against Negros Oriental 3rd District Congressman Arnie Teves. The embattled lawmaker was suspended based on the recommendation of the House Ethics Committee on charges of misconduct and misbehavior. Speaker Romualdez assured the constituents of the province that government services will still be provided even with the suspension of their congressman. Congress has been on recess from March 23 until May 7 due to summer vacation.
The Philippine government vows to rescue overseas Filipino workers, or OFWs, in different countries from death row. The Department of Foreign Affairs, or DFA, says there are 81 OFWs in line for judicial execution. The DFA adds that it was able to secure 135 acquittals last year. This is higher compared to last 2021, with only 91 recorded. Among those acquitted, a vast majority come from the Middle East region, who were household service workers charged with theft, absconding, and breach of trust. 69 were also granted pardons in 2022. The agency vows it will go to great lengths to ensure that no more Filipinos will be executed abroad. Coming up, President Volodymyr Zelensky invites Chinese President Xi Jinping to Ukraine. Iran and Russia convene over economic ties. And President Vladimir Putin says ICC sanctions hurt Russia. Mata ng Agila International will be back after a short break.
ang inyong sumbong siguradong may responding katapat. Hindi nagdadalawang isip na tumulong sinuman ang nangangailangan. Viral ngayon, pamilya ng traffic enforcer na sinagasaan ng isang truck sumisigaw ng hustisya.
Sobrang hirap. Di namin alam kung paano kami magsisimula after nito.
Expose, mga estudyante sa Cabuyao, Laguna na na-heat stroke matapos sa kanilang fire drill. Sino nga ba ang dapat managot? At libreng helmet para sa mga siklista at kaligtasan sa bike lanes isinusulong ng ating karesponde. Mapapanood nyo kami sa mga sumusunod na mga channels. Sabado, alas 6 hanggang alas 7 ng gabi. Ito ang Responde, Mata ng Mamamayan.
Welcome back to Mata ng Agila International. Myanmar's junta has dissolved the National League for Democracy, or NLD, after its failure to meet a deadline to register for an election. 39 other parties were also disbanded by the Myanmar military. State media says the disbandment occurred under dictations of the new military-drafted electoral law. Meanwhile, the NLD has repeatedly ruled out running in the poll, calling it illegitimate. In January, the junta gave political parties 2 months for their electoral registration. Last month, the junta announced a 6-month extension of a 2-year state of emergency and postponed the August elections. Former State Councilor Aung San Suu Kyi was arrested during the coup in February 2021. Suu Kyi served a 33-year term in prison after being convicted on various charges.
Chinese Premier Li Qiang states that even with difficulties presented by the Covid-19 pandemic, China's economy is exhibiting strong momentum. Li's speech at the Bow Forum, a high-profile meeting, was his first at an international conference since he was appointed Beijing's #2 official in early March. He says that China's economic growth is better than in January and in February, when the country saw a surge in Covid-19 infections after lifting strict pandemic controls. He adds the Chinese government will launch a series of new measures.
西班牙恢复向好的态势，从3月份情况来看，比1、2月份情况会更好。特别是消费、投资等主要经济指标，在扩大市场准入、优化营商环境、保障项目陆地方面推出新的一系列举措，不断的优化国企赶港、民企赶船、外企赶土的有效防范化解重大风险，特别是要保持我们国家金融运行。
Li met International Monetary Fund head Kristalina Georgieva during the forum, which has pitched itself as Asia's answer to the World Economic Forum's annual gathering of global leaders in Davos. Other attendees included Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, and Singapore leader Lee Hsien Loong.
Riyadh, the seat of Saudi Arabia's government, joins Moscow and Beijing's political bloc dubbed Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or SCO. This after China assisted Riyadh's reconciliation with Tehran, restoring their severe diplomatic ties. Saudi Arabia's decision was delivered through a memorandum approved by the country's cabinet. Riyadh was granted the status of dialogue partner of the SCO. Meanwhile, Washington says that China's move was expected. Recently, Riyadh's relations with the U.S. have been under strain due to disputes over human rights and oil production. The China-led bloc also includes India, Pakistan, Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan. This year's SCO summit is scheduled for May 4 and 5 in Goa, India. The SCO was established in 2001, rivaling Western institutions as a political, economic, and security organization.
The White House has warned China not to turn the visit of President Tsai Ing-wen to the United States as pretext for aggression around the Taiwan Strait.
There's no reason for them to react harshly or overreact in any way. This is a common occurrence. President Tsai Ing-wen has done it, as I said, 6 times before. Other presidents of Taiwan have transited the United States. Nothing unusual about this.
National Security spokesman John Kirby says Tsai's arrival to the U.S. is a part of routine transits. He insists it is a diplomatic speak designed to signify that it is not an official visit. Kirby also points out that the Biden administration has been keeping the lines of communication open with Beijing.
Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen begins transiting the United States today. This transit is consistent with our long-standing, unofficial relationship with Taiwan, and it is consistent with the United States' One China policy, which remains unchanged.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has reportedly invited Chinese President Xi Jinping to visit Ukraine. Presumably welcoming of China's diplomatic involvement, Zelensky has extended invitations to President Xi for months. When asked about an invitation from Zelensky, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning says she has no information to provide regarding whether President Xi Jinping would accept the invitation. She, however, says that Beijing retains communication with all concerned parties, including Ukraine. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov states that Russian authorities highly appreciate China's balanced position on the issue and that the Chinese leader himself decides the appropriateness of certain contacts. Just last week, Xi, on a state visit to Moscow, proposed a de-escalation and eventual ceasefire of the conflict in Ukraine. But U.S. officials oppose a ceasefire now, saying it would result in Russian territorial gains and give their army more time to regroup.
Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning says China has no information that Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky wants to meet with President Xi Jinping. Mao's statement comes after Zelensky's announcement he invited Jinping to visit Kyiv. Analysts say China tried to position itself as a neutral mediator to the Ukraine and Russia conflict. She also laid out a pitch to help end the fighting between Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Yet China has reportedly refused to condemn Moscow's war despite warnings from the West. Meanwhile, EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen claims she chooses to maintain a no-limits friendship with Putin. She warns China's approach to Russia and Ukraine would determine ties. She also insists Europe will not look to decouple itself from Beijing.
At this very special event, it's really important that we ensure diplomatic stability and open communication with China. I believe it is neither viable nor in Europe's interest to decouple from China. Our relations are not black or white, and our response cannot be either.
Iranian and Russian top diplomats convene over economic and strategic trade relations. From Moscow, RT correspondent Shay Bowes tells us more.
The Ukrainian foreign minister has arrived here in Moscow to meet with his counterpart Sergei Lavrov. The two men are following up on discussions between the leaders of Russia and Iran, which have previously taken place. I think they'll focus essentially on the economy and strategic partnership.
We are satisfied with the increase in the volume of economic cooperation and trade turnover between the two countries. Over the past year and a half, the volume of trade turnover between Iran and Russia has increased by almost 3.5 times. And this trend is still growing at an increasing pace.
Of course, the Iranian foreign minister will have had a central role in brokering, along with China, the regional détente between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which stands to potentially transform the map of the Middle East, to bringing peace and hopefully prosperity to the two countries. So we're starting to see the context of these really important geopolitical meetings which have taken place in Moscow alongside the visit of President Xi Jinping. We have to take them in the context of a shifting map. And this is definitely something that will be discussed between the two men tomorrow during their working meeting.
Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin says international sanctions against Russia could have negative consequences for his country. His statement Wednesday comes after months of insisting that Moscow is adapting to the new economic reality. In a televised meeting with the government, Putin says in the medium term, the measures can really have a negative impact on Russia's economy. But he says the country must focus on its technological and financial sovereignty and its human resources. Western nations have imposed a barrage of economic sanctions against Russia since it invaded Ukraine more than a year ago. In particular, they targeted Russia's oil and gas exports. On the bright side, Putin says unemployment in Russia remains at an all-time low, and he predicts inflation will drop below 4% by the end of March. U.S. President Joe Biden brushes off UK's MI5 warnings of increased threat level of terrorism in Northern Ireland. Biden says no one can keep him from traveling to Northern Ireland next month. Meanwhile, the White House has yet to conclude the U.S. leader's planned trip for the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Agreement, which was signed on April 10, 1998. Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Heaton-Harris says domestic spy agency MI5 judged the conditions as severe. This classifies that a threat is highly likely to happen. The militant group New Irish Republican Army is responsible for the elevation of the threat. Sources say the group's hostilities is aimed to reunify the Republic of Ireland. However, Biden is still expected to visit Northern Ireland for the occasion with former President Bill Clinton, who brokered the landmark deal.
Israeli lawmakers held a second day of talks Wednesday on controversial judicial reforms. But while the politicians talked, demonstrators protested. This is what it looked like in Tel Aviv. Protesters filled the streets again, vowing to keep pressure on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to drop the reforms. Opponents of the reforms are skeptical about Netanyahu's decision to put the changes on pause. They call the talks a fraud. At issue is a proposal to give lawmakers more control over the Supreme Court, something critics say will erode democracy. Activists say the mass rallies will continue. The demonstrations have been a weekly feature every Saturday night. Up next, U.S. Senate approves to end Covid19 National Emergency. French woman arrested for insulting President Emmanuel Macron. And Mexico to investigate deaths of 39 migrants in detention center fire. Please stay tuned. The Mata ng Agila International will be back with more global news.
Pakiusap, tawagan mo si Mary.
Kung hindi niyo ipapaliwanag sa akin, wala akong gagawin kahit anuman. Anong bagay ba ang sasabihin niyo kay Mary?
Ikaw? Ikaw? Anong ako?
Mabibigyang kaliwanagan ang mga katanungan.
Anong ginawa mo sa kanya? Kanino mo binigay ang kapatid ko?
Ngunit mabigat ang kapalit ng katotohanan.
Rolando, wala na ang mami ko. Nandito ang tito mo. Ano ka ba naman? Batiin mo naman ang pamangkin mo.
Two sisters.
Panalo tayo pag together, walang talo pag together. Let's stand together. Sunday 25.
On Wednesday, the U.S. Senate approved a bill to terminate the Covid19 National Emergency. The final vote passed the bill with 68 for and 23 against, despite the U.S. President Joe Biden's apparent disapproval. A White House official reportedly says that the president strongly opposes the bill but will still sign it. He adds that when signed, the administration will continue working with agencies to wind down the national emergency with as much notice as possible to Americans who could potentially be impacted. With the lack of a veto threat, the United States will soon see an end to the 3-year COVID crisis.
Former President Jair Bolsonaro returned to Brazil Thursday for the first time since losing the 2022 election. A crowd of around 200 supporters gathered at the airport to welcome him. Local reports say Bolsonaro's arrival was guarded by a heavy police deployment. Despite the excitement of his supporters, Bolsonaro said he will not lead any opposition party in Brazil. He discreetly left the scene after flashing a thumbs-up sign to TV cameras. Bolsonaro faces legal trouble in Brazil, particularly his alleged role in inciting supporters in a failed bid to oust President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva.
On Wednesday night, 2 US Blackhawk helicopters crashed during a training incident in Kentucky, resulting in multiple casualties. The incident occurred around near the Army base Fort Campbell. State police, military investigators, and several other agencies were on the scene of the crash, setting up a perimeter around the debris field. The 101st Airborne Division, the only air division of the U.S. Army, confirms the incident on Twitter. They say their focus is on soldiers and families involved.
Britain's defense minister says he would love to see his country bring back compulsory military service. Ben Wallace says he is envious of Scandinavian countries who kept conscription long after the UK scrapped it in 1960.
So I can't speculate on when, where, or how any offensive may happen, but I think it is no secret that Ukraine is keen to start the process of rolling back Russian forces in the conflict. Obviously, the Russian forces are making almost no progress whatsoever, suffering huge casualties for whatever pieces of ground they do take, and the Russian forces have some really significant and deep systemic problems at the moment in their. I mean, part of that is a different cultural thing. Part of that is most of those countries have had conscription continual. Sweden, I think, paused it for 7 years, I think, and have reinvigorated it, and actually with some great success. And so I think conscription and reserves often go hand in hand because everyone's done it. So I definitely think we're all envious of how they use their reserves, and I would love to have a model like that.
Wallace says military reserves that can be activated quickly in times of need are important.
King Charles, in his first speech to German Parliament, vows he will do his utmost to boost ties between Britain and Germany. He put emphasis on Britain and Germany's commitment to protect and advance shared democratic values. King Charles also calls Russia's war in Ukraine a threat to Europe.
Die Sicherheit Europas ist ebenso bedroht wie unsere demokratischen Werte. Aber die Welt hat nicht tatenlos zugesehen. Wir sind erschüttert von der furchtbaren Zerstörung. Aber wir können Mut schöpfen aus unserer Einigkeit zur Verteidigung der Ukraine, des Friedens und der Freiheit.
He also lauds Germany's decision to send military support to Ukraine. Analysts view King Charles' first state visit and his choice to travel to Germany as a bid to build bridges following Brexit.
A woman in France is arrested for insulting President Emmanuel Macron on social media, describing the president as filth. The complaint focused on a post on her Facebook page. It was also the day Macron gave an interview to media to defend his controversial pension reforms. The 50-year-old woman was astonished when she answered a knock on the door to find police had come to arrest her. The woman, named by the media as Valérie, had been a supporter of the 2018 to 2019 Yellow Vest protests that shook Macron during his first mandate. She risks a fine of 12,000 euros and will stand trial on June 20 in Saint-Omer.
Protests over pension reform in France are drawing smaller crowds. About 250,000 fewer people took part in strikes and demonstrations during this week's Day of Action. Whether people are getting tired of the chaos or violence like you see here, smaller crowds are turning out to voice their opposition to raising the retirement age from 62 to 64. The protests are hitting workers in the pocketbook. They don't get paid for the time they are on strike. The union representing trash collectors has called off a 3-week-old strike that has left Paris streets filled with tons of rotting garbage. Although things have settled down somewhat, unions are calling for another day of action 1 week from today. French Prime Minister Elisabeth Borne has called for calm. She says she will meet with trade unions next week. Borne again promised France's highest constitutional authority will rule on the legality of President Emmanuel Macron's reforms. They have been passed by Parliament without a vote by MPs. After the government survived 2 non-confidence votes on the issue, the reforms were considered adopted by Parliament. Germany's national debt has reached an all-time high, peaking at 2.37 trillion euros, equaling to 28,155 euros dollar per person. A majority of the funds were utilized to combat COVID. The rest contributed to federal, state, and municipality borrowing. A larger portion of annual budget will now be used to pay increasing interest payments. Germany has also prepared 100 billion euros worth of special funds to improve its armed forces. Despite being able to take on more debt, the so-called special asset funds are nothing more than additional liabilities.
Mexican authorities have announced a homicide investigation into the deaths of 39 migrants in a detention center fire. This after mounting evidence that people in charge at the center did nothing to evacuate the inmates. Authorities are being scrutinized over how they handled the situation. Disturbing video surveillance footage appears to show guards leaving as flames engulfed the cell with migrants trapped inside. At least 39 people died after inmates set fire to mattresses at the detention center in Ciudad Juarez, just south of the U.S.-Mexico border. Another 28 inmates suffered injuries. It is believed they started the blaze because they feared they would be deported. The government has not indicated what countries the victims are from. Outside the institution, people left flowers and candles during a vigil. Protesters demanded better treatment from authorities. Family members waited for news of their relatives. On Wednesday, hundreds of migrants marched to the border crossing at El Paso, Texas. They attempted to cross after rumors circulated that they might be allowed in.
Colombian authorities say that the Ejército de Liberación Nacional, or ELN, is likely responsible for an attack in the municipality of El Carmen. They say the assailants used long-range weapons and explosive devices, killing 9 soldiers and injuring another 9. The attack is seen as a setback to the renewed peace talks with the ELN, which are aimed at achieving President Gustavo Petro's goal of total peace in the country. Petro took to Twitter to express his grief over the attack and revealed that 7 of the deceased soldiers were serving their mandatory military service, while the other 2 were non-commissioned officers. He also points out that the perpetrators of the attack were completely opposed to peace and the interests of the people. The conflict with the ELN has left around 450,000 dead in the past 60 years. Despite the unexpected attack, President Petro has called for a meeting with the government delegation to the ELN table, as well as accompanying countries, to discuss the future of the peace talks. Pablo Beltran, head of the ELN delegation, responds, stating that their fighters are also committed to peace talks.
Venezuela has arrested 21 people allegedly involved in a corruption scheme at the state-owned oil company. The scandal has resulted in the resignation of the country's oil minister. The suspects appeared in court in the Venezuelan capital of Caracas. They include high-ranking government officials as well as private business people. Authorities have been probing high-ranking officials who could be involved in corruption and embezzlement. Venezuelan media has reported that some $3 billion from last year's oil sales have been diverted. The sales had been done with cryptocurrency to circumvent U.S. sanctions against Venezuelan crude. The amount embezzled amounts to 12% of the company's revenue last year.
Australia's parliament has passed landmark climate laws targeting the nation's worst polluters, forcing coal mines and oil refineries to limit their emissions by about 5% each year. The laws apply to over 200 major industrial facilities, forming the backbone of Australia's commitment to reach net zero emissions by 2050. Climate Change Minister Chris Bowen says that the laws safeguard their climate, economy, and future. The new laws are expected to stop 200 million tons of carbon from being released into the atmosphere over the next decade. The move comes after a series of natural disasters in the last few years. Heavy storms in 2022 caused catastrophic floods in Australia's east coast, killing more than 20 people. The passage of the legislation has not only given Australia a long-awaited climate policy, but also sent a strong signal to businesses that the country is serious about tackling the climate emergency.
The UN General Assembly adopts by consensus and cheers a landmark resolution, one that calls for the world body's top court to lay out nations' legal obligations in combating climate change. UN Chief Antonio Guterres says together history is being made. Guterres emphasizes that an opinion from the International Court of Justice would help the General Assembly, the UN, and member states to take the bolder and stronger climate action that the world desperately needs, even if the opinion is non-binding. Coming right up, China and Brazil strike trade deal agreement. Barangay Ginebra earns a trip to the 2023 PBA Governors Cup finals. And Avengers actor Jeremy Renner recuperates from snowplow incident. Catch more news when Mata ng Agila International returns.
May naiibsa ng araw-araw na pakikipagbakbakan ng ating mga kababayan. May magagawa pa ba sa malapagong na pag-usad ng kalagayan ng pampublikong transportasyon sa bansa?
They're spending anywhere from a third of their day in commute. That is just unacceptable.
So kung kailangan kong nasa opisina ng 9 o'clock, kailangan gising ako ng 4 a.m., didesisyonan ko na po sa sarili ko na magbabike na lang ako.
Tataas yung pamasahe, tataas na rin po yung mga basic commodities.
Sumasakit ang ulo ko sa mga sinasabi. Sa mga sinasabi nyo. Himayin natin yan. Reality check.
Panalo tayo pag together, wala talo pag together. Let's stand together sa Net 25.
Ang Best Public Affairs Program. And the star goes to Open for Business Net 25.
It is a signal to the world that we are open for business.
Open for Business with Cesar Vallejos. Every Sunday, 9 p.m.
Mga ka-PSL, ako diay si Gab Dagangon ng Davao Occidental Tigers. Para sa mainit action, sa hardcourt, tutok lang sa Pilipinas Super League. Ito ang liga ko.
Let's stand together sa Net 25.
The United States Securities and Exchange Commission is seeking $2.4 billion in funding to crack down on crypto misconduct. Shane Lim tells us more.
U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission or SEC Chair Gary Gensler speaks out in favor of President Joe Biden's request to allocate $2.4 billion in funding for his agency. Gensler believes that additional funding is needed to keep up with the increased complexity in the capital markets and to crack down on misconduct in the cryptocurrency industry. He states that the funding would be used to hire 170 additional staff, most of whom would work within the regulator's enforcement and examination divisions. This could be a major step forward in the fight against financial misconduct in the crypto space. Gensler has described crypto as rife with non-compliance and a highly speculative asset class. It will also bring staffing levels above what they were in 2016 for the first time. In 2021, the regulator announced 22 enforcement actions related to crypto, resulting in $242 million in monetary penalties. The SEC has already taken significant action in the crypto space. This year, that amount has already grown to 30 enforcement actions. Gensler's testimony to the House Appropriations Committee highlighted the fact that the SEC had received more than 35,000 separate tips, complaints, and referrals from whistleblowers and others. As a result, the SEC was able to bring more than 750 enforcement actions, resulting in orders for $6.4 billion in penalties and disgorgement. It is clear that the SEC is taking a more active role in the crypto space and is keen to ensure that investors are protected from financial misconduct. Gensler's plea for more funding could be the first step in allowing the regulator to do its job more effectively. Only time will tell whether the Biden administration will grant the additional funds. Shane Lim for Mata ng Agila International. Trusted, connected, on point.
China and Brazil strike a deal to ditch the US dollar in favor of their own currencies in trade transactions. The deal will enable China and Brazil to carry out trade and financial transactions directly. The two countries will exchange yuan for reais or vice versa, rather than converting their currencies to the US dollar first. The Brazilian Trade and Investment Promotion Agency says the new arrangement is expected to reduce costs and promote even greater bilateral trade and facilitate investment. China overtook the United States as Brazil's top trading partner in 2009. Today, Brazil is the largest recipient of Chinese investment in Latin America, driven by spending on high-tension electricity transmission lines and oil extraction.
Barangay Ginebra earns a final strip as Talk and Text is on brink to face them. Ginebra completes a 3-0 semi-sweep of San Miguel Beer and advances to the 2023 PBA Governors Cup finals. With a massive display of never-say-die spirit, Ginebra returned to familiar territory. The Gin Kings rallied past the Beermen 87-85 with a strong finishing kick capped by Justin Brownlee to Christian Stand Hardinger winning play. They fought back from an 18-point deficit lead and salvaged the clincher against San Miguel. Meanwhile, Talk and Text gets back hard at Meralco 99-80. TNT put the clamps on the Bolts for a pivotal 2-1 lead in their best-of-5 semifinal face-off. The Tropang Giga holds Meralco to a miserable 25% shooting and established a 26-point lead. Meralco trimmed the gap in the third but not close enough to get into the game. TNT's Ronde Hollis Jefferson led the team with 40 points and 13 rebounds. The two teams clash again at Friday at the Big Dome, with the Tropa taking a shot at an explosive title playoff versus the Barangay Ginebra Kings.
Still in sports, British heavyweight Anthony Joshua returns to the ring to face American assassin Jermaine Franklin. In London, United Kingdom, Ryan Florentino tells us more.
The former two-time world champion Joshua will be hoping to begin a new chapter of his career with a win against American Franklin. It is a change of pace for Joshua, the first which is not a world title contest since 2016. It is also a return to London's O2 Arena after 7 previous fights at the venue in his hometown. The fight is being billed as a new dawn for AJ, with the former Team GB gold medalist from 2012 hoping to rebuild himself with an eye on a potential world title shot in the next 18 months. It has not been confirmed how much Joshua will earn from the fight, but he is expected to take home as much as £10 million should he win the contest in London. Meanwhile, Franklin is guaranteed a reported £800,000 for the fight, but that could rise to over £1 million should he win the fight. Eddie Hearn is promoting the event with Matchroom, with the fight being broadcast live for DAZN subscribers without the need for pay-per-view. However, it is not AJ's biggest fight, and the purse is not expected to be close to the reported $33 million he earned to face Usyk last August. Joshua, whose professional record stands at 24 wins, 22 by way of knockouts, and 3 defeats, has changed trainers ahead of this weekend's bout, with Dallas-based Derek James taking over from trainer Robert Garcia. Reporting from London, United Kingdom, I'm Ryan Florentino for Matana Agila International, trusted, connected, on point.
Avengers actor Jeremy Renner is recuperating in Nevada from his snowplow accident, where he suffered more than 30 broken bones. Last January, the actor spent New Year's Day in his hometown and suffered from the unexpected incident. Renner got run over by his 6-ton snowplow while saving his nephew from getting hit. He posted updates on his rehabilitation on his Twitter. The latest of his recovery was his video posted on March 27. The actor was seen walking on anti-gravity treadmill.
That's seriously cool. And you're totally doing the walk of motion.
It's Thursday, and to uplift your Thursday night, here's a quote from English theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking. However difficult life may seem, there is always something you can do and succeed at.
And just like our top sports newsmakers tonight, Ginebra,
oh,
never
definitely.
say die
Uh-huh.
until you find what you're good at and what you can succeed at.
That's very good.
And that's a wrap for tonight's news. Catch the latest updates on our social media channels. I am Ricky Matay.
And I am Nina Richie Alago Flores. This is Matanang Agila International, trusted, connected, on point.